Good day, everyone. Today, we explore a powerful and eye-opening documentary, World's Toughest Prisons, Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia Behind Bars, Best of Free Documentary. This gripping film takes us beyond prison walls and into realities many of us rarely imagine. Realities shaped by violence, survival, poverty, corruption, and, at times, unexpected humanity. In Bolivia, we witness prisons that operate less like state-controlled institutions and more like small, self-governed communities. In facilities such as San Pedro Prison, inmates do not merely serve time, they build lives inside. Families live with prisoners. Cells are bought and sold. Survival depends on one's ability to earn, negotiate, and adapt. It challenges our understanding of what a prison system is meant to be. Moving to Mexico, the documentary reveals the overwhelming influence of cartels and organized crime within prison walls. Overcrowding, corruption, and violence shape daily life. Gangs extend their control from the outside world into the prison system, blurring the line between incarceration and continued criminal enterprise. The prison becomes a reflection of broader societal struggles with drug trafficking and systemic corruption. In Colombia, we see institutions grappling with a history deeply marked by armed conflict and narcotics trafficking. Colombian prisons face extreme overcrowding and limited resources, yet within these harsh environments, stories of resilience and rehabilitation also emerge. Some inmates seek education, faith, or skills as a path toward redemption. What makes this documentary so compelling is not just the brutality or danger. It is the humanity. Behind every statistic is a person, someone shaped by circumstances, choices, and systemic forces. The film forces us to ask difficult questions. Are prisons meant to punish, rehabilitate, or simply contain? What happens when systems fail to provide structure and fairness? And how much of what we see behind bars is a mirror of inequalities outside them? These prisons are described as the toughest, not only because of violence or harsh conditions, but because survival itself becomes a daily test, physically, mentally, and morally. Ultimately, this documentary reminds us that prisons do not exist in isolation. They reflect the political, economic, and social realities of their nations. To understand prisons in Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia is to understand the deeper struggles these societies face. The documentary takes viewers deep inside the prison systems of Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia, offering a rare and unfiltered look at some of the harshest correctional environments in the world. Rather than presenting prisons as uniform institutions, the film highlights how each country's prison system reflects its unique social, political, and economic realities. In Bolivia, the focus is on unconventional prison structures where inmates often govern themselves, manage internal economies, and even live with their families inside the facility. This challenges the traditional global perception of prisons as tightly controlled state-run institutions. The documentary shows how survival inside depends on financial resources, social alliances, and the ability to navigate informal power structures. In Mexico, the film exposes the deep influence of organized crime within prison walls. Cartel power, corruption, and overcrowding shape daily life for inmates. The system often struggles with maintaining order, and prisons can become extensions of criminal networks operating outside. The documentary emphasizes how systemic corruption and limited resources intensify violence and insecurity within these facilities. In Colombia, the prison system is portrayed as heavily burdened by decades of armed conflict and narcotics-related crime. Overcrowding, underfunding, and security challenges are central themes. Yet, the documentary also sheds light on rehabilitation efforts, faith-based initiatives, and educational programs that aim to provide inmates with a second chance despite difficult conditions. By comparing these three countries, the documentary does more than show tough environments. It draws attention to how incarceration systems are shaped by national histories, governance structures, inequality, and crime patterns. It encourages viewers to see prisons not just as places of punishment, but as complex institutions influenced by broader societal forces that expand the two key make it lengthy don't add ending to. In Bolivia's San Pedro Prison, inmates largely self-govern and families may live inside. One of the most striking and unconventional examples shown in the documentary is San Pedro Prison in La Paz, Bolivia. Unlike most prisons around the world that operate under strict state control, San Pedro functions almost like a small, self-contained society run largely by the inmates themselves. The government provides external security, but inside the walls, prisoners create their own systems of order, leadership, and economy. Inmates elect representatives or delegates who oversee different sections of the prison. These leaders manage disputes, enforce internal rules, and coordinate daily life within their assigned areas. Instead of being assigned cells, prisoners must buy or rent their living spaces. The quality of accommodation depends entirely on how much money an inmate has. Wealthier prisoners can afford private rooms with amenities such as televisions, kitchens, and better sanitation, while poorer inmates often live in overcrowded and basic conditions. This creates a visible economic hierarchy inside the prison, mirroring inequality found outside in society. Perhaps even more surprising is the presence of families living inside the prison. Wives and children are sometimes allowed to reside with incarcerated relatives, especially if the inmate can financially support them. Children grow up within the prison walls, attending school outside during the day, but returning to the prison at night. This unique arrangement blurs the line between punishment and community life, raising complex questions about justice, social responsibility, and a long-term psychological impact on families. The internal economy is another defining feature. Inmates run shops, restaurants, workshops, and small businesses to earn money. Everything, from food to better housing, is part of a marketplace system. Survival depends not only on strength or alliances, but also on entrepreneurship and social networks. Those without financial means often struggle the most, highlighting how poverty continues to shape experiences even behind bars. San Pedro Prison challenges conventional ideas about incarceration. It operates less like a traditional correctional facility and more like a self-regulated neighborhood confined within walls, where power, money, and community structures determine daily life. One of the most revealing aspects highlighted in the documentary is the way prison cells in parts of Bolivia, particularly in places like San Pedro Prison, are treated as commodities rather than assigned living spaces. Instead of the state allocating accommodation based on need or availability, inmates must purchase or rent their own cells upon arrival. This transforms basic shelter into a financial transaction, immediately placing prisoners into an economic hierarchy the moment they enter the facility. The price of a cell varies widely depending on its size, location, and condition. Some areas of the prison are considered more desirable because they are safer, less crowded, or closer to services such as bathrooms and internal markets. Wealthier inmates can afford larger, cleaner, and more secure rooms, sometimes even multi-room spaces with electricity, appliances, and private amenities. In contrast, inmates without financial resources may be forced into overcrowded communal spaces or extremely poor living conditions, where sanitation and safety are major concerns. This system creates a microcosm of the outside world's class divisions. Economic inequality does not disappear the prison gate. Instead, it becomes even more visible and consequential. Money determines comfort, security, access to food, and even influence. Prisoners who can afford better housing often gain higher status within the internal social structure, while those who cannot pay may find themselves vulnerable to exploitation, coercion, or dependence on others for basic survival. The buying and selling of cells also fuels an internal real estate market. As inmates are released or transferred, their cells may be resold, sometimes at higher prices depending on demand. This transactional system reinforces the idea that survival inside is closely tied to financial capability. For many inmates, family members on the outside play a crucial role by sending money to help secure better living conditions, further connecting the internal prison economy with external social networks. Rather than functioning as a standardized correctional environment, this arrangement transforms incarceration into a system where economic power directly shapes one's daily reality, reinforcing disparities and redefining what justice and equality look like within prison walls in the documentary. The prison system in Mexico is portrayed as deeply affected by the power and reach of drug cartels and organized criminal networks. Rather than being fully controlled by the state, some facilities struggle with internal corruption, gang dominance, and the continued operation of criminal enterprises from behind bars. The influence of cartels does not simply stop at the prison gates. In many cases, incarceration becomes an extension of the power structures that already exist outside. Inside certain prisons, rival groups often form along cartel lines. Inmates may align themselves based on previous affiliations, regional loyalties, or protection needs. These alliances shape daily life, determining where a prisoner sleeps, who they associate with, and how safe they are. Violence can erupt when rival factions clash, especially in overcrowded environments where tensions are already high. The documentary shows how maintaining control becomes a constant struggle for prison authorities facing limited resources and internal corruption. Corruption plays a significant role in strengthening cartel influence. Guards or officials may accept bribes in exchange for privileges, protection, or the smuggling of contraband such as weapons, drugs, and communication devices. In some cases, incarcerated cartel leaders are able to continue directing operations outside the prison using illicit cell phones. This blurs the line between punishment and continued criminal activity, raising concerns about the effectiveness of the justice system. Overcrowding further complicates the situation. Many Mexican prisons house far more inmates than they were designed to hold. This creates chaotic conditions where supervision becomes difficult and informal power structures flourish. In such environments, stronger groups often dominate weaker inmates, controlling access to food, sleeping areas, and even basic safety. Survival may depend on joining a faction or paying for protection. The documentary illustrates that the influence of organized crime inside Mexican prisons reflects broader national struggles with drug trafficking, systemic corruption, and institutional weaknesses. Instead of serving purely as correctional institutions focused on rehabilitation, some facilities become arenas where external criminal conflicts continue to play out within confined walls. The documentary highlights how corruption and overcrowding have become deeply rooted structural problems within parts of Mexico's prison system. These two issues are closely connected, each reinforcing the other and creating an environment where maintaining order, safety, and fairness becomes extremely difficult. Rather than functioning as controlled rehabilitation centers, some prisons operate under constant pressure from limited space, insufficient funding, and weakened institutional oversight. Overcrowding is one of the most visible challenges. Many facilities house far more inmates than they were originally designed to accommodate. Cells built for a small number of prisoners may hold double or even triple their intended capacity. As a result, inmates are sometimes forced to sleep on floors, in hallways, or in makeshift spaces. Limited access to clean water, sanitation, medical care, and food becomes an everyday struggle. Overcrowding increases tension, fuels conflict, and makes it harder for authorities to monitor inmate activity effectively. This strained environment creates opportunities for corruption to flourish. When resources are scarce, access to basic necessities can become transactional. Inmates may be required to pay bribes for safer sleeping areas, better food, visitation rights, or protection from violence. In some cases, corrupt officials may collaborate with powerful inmate groups, allowing contraband such as drugs, weapons, or mobile phones to enter the facility in exchange for financial gain. These practices weaken institutional control and undermine the rule of law within prison walls. Corruption also affects the fairness of the justice process. Pretrial detainees, individuals who have not yet been convicted, often make up a large portion of the prison population. Delays in the legal system contribute to overcrowding, leaving many individuals incarcerated for extended periods without sentencing. Those with financial means may secure legal advantages, while poorer inmates remain trapped in prolonged detention, reinforcing systemic inequality. The combined impact of overcrowding and corruption transforms daily life into a constant negotiation for space, safety, and survival. Tension builds in confined conditions where oversight is limited and power structures shift away from formal authority. In such circumstances, maintaining stability becomes an ongoing challenge, and the prison environment reflects deeper institutional and social pressures affecting the broader justice system. The documentary presents the prison system in Colombia as deeply shaped by the nation's long and complex history of armed conflict, insurgency, and narcotics trafficking. For decades, Colombia experienced internal violence involving guerrilla movements such as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, paramilitary organizations like the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, AUC, and powerful drug cartels, including the Medellin cartel. These conflicts left a lasting mark not only on Colombian society, but also on its correctional institutions. Many inmates in Colombian prisons have backgrounds connected to armed groups, organized crime, or narcotics-related offenses. As a result, prisons often house individuals with military-style training, strong ideological beliefs, or deep ties to criminal networks. This can create complex social dynamics inside facilities, where former combatants, rival factions, and criminal organizations coexist within confined spaces. The legacy of conflict does not disappear at the prison gates. Instead, it influences alliances, tensions, and power structures behind bars. Drug trafficking, in particular, has had a significant impact on incarceration rates. Colombia's historical role in the global cocaine trade led to the imprisonment of thousands involved at different levels of the narcotics chain, from high-ranking traffickers to low-level couriers. This influx has contributed to overcrowding and strained institutional resources. Prisons must manage not only high-security risks, but also individuals who were driven into the drug economy by poverty and limited opportunities. The peace process with FARC and efforts at demobilization introduced new challenges as well. Former combatants entered the justice system under transitional agreements, raising questions about rehabilitation, reintegration, and restorative justice. Colombian prisons therefore carry the burden of balancing punishment with reconciliation, especially in cases tied to political violence and armed struggle. Within these facilities, the documentary shows how history shapes identity and behavior. Some inmates seek transformation through education, vocational training, or religious programs, while others remain connected to the networks that once defined their lives. The prison environment becomes a reflection of Colombia's broader journey, from decades of conflict toward attempts at stability and reform. Where the past continues to influence present realities, one of the strongest common themes throughout the documentary is that overcrowding and limited resources are not isolated problems, but shared realities in Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia. Despite differences in structure, governance, and criminal dynamics, the prison systems in these three nations face similar structural pressures that deeply affect daily life behind bars. Overcrowding places enormous strain on facilities that were never designed to hold such large populations. Cells meant for a few individuals often accommodate many more, forcing inmates to sleep in shifts or on floors. Shared spaces such as bathrooms, kitchens, and common areas become congested, increasing tensions and a likelihood of conflict. In such tight conditions, privacy disappears, and even basic comfort becomes a privilege. The psychological toll of constant proximity, noise, and lack of personal space can be as challenging as the physical hardship. Limited resources further intensify these conditions. Funding shortages affect access to healthcare, sanitation, nutrition, and security infrastructure. Medical services may be insufficient to meet the needs of large inmate populations, leading to untreated illnesses and preventable health crises. Food supplies can be inconsistent in quality or quantity, and in some cases, inmates must rely on family support or internal prison economies to supplement their basic needs. Staff shortages also contribute to instability. When there are too few trained officers to supervise growing inmate populations, maintaining order becomes increasingly difficult. This can allow informal power structures to emerge, where stronger inmates or organized groups exert control over weaker individuals. The lack of adequate rehabilitation programs, such as education, job training, or psychological support, limits opportunities for personal reform and successful reintegration into society. Across Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia, overcrowding and scarce resources do more than create uncomfortable conditions. They shape the entire prison experience. They influence safety, fairness, access to opportunity, and the effectiveness of correctional goals. These shared challenges reveal how broader economic limitations and systemic inefficiencies outside prison walls directly impact the realities within them. The documentary makes it clear that prisons in Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia are not isolated institutions separated from society. Instead, they function as concentrated reflections of the broader social, political, and economic challenges facing each country. The conditions behind bars often reveal systemic issues that exist far beyond prison walls. In Bolivia, the informal economy and social inequality seen in society are mirrored inside prisons, where wealth determines living conditions and opportunities. The fact that inmates must purchase their own cells reflects larger patterns of economic disparity. Limited state oversight inside facilities parallels challenges in governance and resource allocation in the broader national system. In Mexico, the influence of organized crime within prisons reflects the country's ongoing struggle with cartel violence and corruption. When criminal networks maintain power behind bars, it demonstrates how deeply embedded these organizations are within national institutions. Corruption inside prisons echoes corruption in other sectors, showing how institutional weaknesses can allow illegal systems to thrive. In Colombia, decades of armed conflict and narcotics trafficking are reflected in the composition of the prison population. Former combatants, drug traffickers, and individuals affected by violence represent the social consequences of long-term instability. The presence of rehabilitation and reintegration efforts inside prisons mirrors national attempts at reconciliation and reform following years of conflict. Across all three countries, poverty plays a significant role in incarceration rates. Many inmates come from marginalized communities with limited access to education, employment, and social support. This demonstrates how structural inequality contributes to crime and imprisonment. Prisons become spaces where the consequences of social exclusion are concentrated and made visible. The documentary suggests that to understand these prison systems, one must understand the societies that created them. Issues such as inequality, corruption, political instability, and economic hardship do not disappear when individuals are incarcerated. Instead, they reappear in intensified forms within confined environments, making prisons a powerful lens through which to examine national realities. While the documentary emphasizes the brutality, danger, and deprivation present in prisons across Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia, it also highlights the remarkable resilience of inmates who strive to survive, adapt, and even improve themselves despite the odds. These stories provide a nuanced perspective, reminding viewers that prisoners are more than just statistics. They are individuals navigating extraordinarily challenging circumstances. In Bolivia, some inmates use the unique self-governing structures of prisons like San Pedro Prison to develop entrepreneurial skills. By running small businesses within the prison, such as shops, restaurants, or workshops, they not only support themselves, but also learn financial and management skills that could aid them upon release. Families living inside the prison often play a role in fostering community and providing emotional support, highlighting how social bonds can be a source of resilience. In Mexico, Despite the pervasive presence of gangs and organized crime, some prisoners pursue education or vocational training programs offered within the facilities. Learning new skills, whether in carpentry, mechanics, or literacy programs, becomes a way for inmates to assert some control over their future and resist the negative influences surrounding them. Engaging in these programs can offer a sense of purpose and hope amid the chaos of overcrowding and corruption. Colombian prisons similarly show instances of rehabilitation and personal transformation. Inmates participate in educational classes, spiritual programs, and artistic or cultural activities, which provide outlets for self-expression and emotional healing. Former combatants or individuals affected by armed conflict often seek to reconcile with their past through structured programs, demonstrating that even in harsh environments, there are pathways to redemption and growth. These stories of resilience reveal the human capacity to adapt and survive in extreme conditions. They also highlight the potential for prisons to function not only as spaces of punishment, but as places where meaningful change and personal development can occur, even when resources are limited and challenges are immense. Inmates' determination to learn, teach, and support one another underscores the enduring strength of the human spirit. One of the most compelling aspects of the documentary is how it goes beyond simply showing harsh conditions to provoke deep reflection on the purpose and effectiveness of prisons in Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia. By presenting viewers with raw, unfiltered glimpses of life behind bars, the film challenges conventional notions of punishment and asks whether incarceration achieves its intended goals of justice, rehabilitation, and societal protection. In Bolivia, the self-governed systems in prisons, such as San Pedro Prison, provoke questions about what justice truly means. When inmates buy cells, manage businesses, and live with their families, it blurs the line between punishment and ordinary life. The documentary forces viewers to consider whether survival under these conditions constitutes a form of justice, or if it simply perpetuates social and economic inequalities within the prison walls. In Mexico, the pervasive influence of organized crime and systemic corruption raises concerns about fairness and accountability. When inmates can continue criminal activities from inside prison, and protection or privileges are distributed through bribes or gang alliances, the documentary asks whether the penal system is serving society or simply reinforcing criminal networks. It invites viewers to reflect on what reforms might be necessary to create truly equitable and effective correctional systems. Colombian prisons, burdened by decades of armed conflict and drug-related crime, highlight the challenges of balancing punishment with rehabilitation and reconciliation. The film presents examples of inmates seeking education, spiritual growth, or vocational training, prompting questions about how justice systems can support transformation while still maintaining accountability. It also underscores the difficulty of integrating individuals with histories tied to broader social and political violence into programs that promote personal reform. Across all three countries, the documentary encourages viewers to grapple with complex moral and societal questions. Are prisons meant to punish, rehabilitate, or simply contain? How do structural inequalities outside prison walls affect the outcomes inside them? And what reforms, whether legal, social, or institutional, might be necessary to ensure that incarceration fulfills its intended role in society? By exploring these questions, the documentary goes beyond sensationalism and violence to examine the philosophical and ethical dimensions of incarceration, leaving audiences to consider the broader implications for justice systems worldwide. In conclusion, world's toughest prisons, Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia, does more than show harsh conditions. It opens a window into the complex realities of incarceration in some of the world's most challenging prison systems. It challenges us to look beyond the walls and ask difficult questions about justice, inequality, and human resilience. While the environments are brutal and unforgiving, the documentary also reminds us that even in the darkest places, the human spirit can endure, adapt, and sometimes even thrive. It is a powerful call to understand prisons not merely as spaces of punishment, but as mirrors reflecting the societies that create them, and to consider how reform, compassion, and accountability might transform these spaces for the better.